Brian Clark with Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife, and I'm going to be demonstrating a method of quartering your deer in the field, sometimes called the gutless method, or field quartering or quick quartering, where you can take all the usable portions of your deer out with you from the field and leave the carcass for the scavengers, and it's less for you to have to handle or deal with when you get home. So as soon as you harvest your deer and retrieve it, you want to be sure to complete a harvest log in which you record on the back of your license, a piece of paper, or on your phone, the species of kill, the date, the county, and the sex of the animal. So after you've completed your harvest log, you want to be sure to telecheck your animal. And so the telecheck number is, for Kentucky, is recorded on the hunting guide. And you want to be sure to consult the hunting guide each season before you go for changes. So you want to complete your harvest log, telecheck your animal, and then you can remove the hide head and begin to process the animal as you see fit. So we're going to get started, and I'm going to talk for a few minutes about some benefits of using this method, and then also some of the essential tools, and then we'll begin doing the demonstration. So first of all, a couple of benefits of field quartering your deer include that you can leave the carcass in the field. So like for many of us who live in subdivisions or live in town, you don't have to then dispose of the carcass. If you bring it home and then butcher it yourself or take it somewhere, you don't have to worry about that. Also, you can remove the usable portions, the quarters of the animal, quickly and get that meat cooling as soon as possible. And you also reduce your likelihood of fouling meat by getting into the viscera, into the guts of the deer. So those are some advantages. Also, if you're very far from your vehicle, I've personally adopted this method about 10 years ago when hunting pretty good distance away from a vehicle, and so it eliminated the need for a drag. So I no longer had to drag a deer a quarter to a half a mile, and some of you may hunt further from your vehicle or from your home, and this eliminates that need. So those are some advantages to this technique. Some of the essential items you'll need for field quartering a deer include some kind of a knife. I personally use a combination of knives. I use a skinning knife. Some people call these Wyoming knives, but basically it's a knife that's used to keep you from getting into meat and in the entrails of the deer, and I'll demonstrate that in a moment. And then also I personally use a replaceable blade knife for most of the work, and then for a couple of delicate areas I'll actually use a fillet knife. Just like the finesse of being able to use a longer bladed knife for some cuts that are actually up against the abdominal wall to prevent my getting into it. We highly recommend use of gloves, either latex gloves or some other kind of disposable surgical gloves. And that's not only to minimize your mess, but it's also just in case you were to get into an abscess in the animal, or if there happened to be a disease issue, which is unlikely, but it's possible, then you maximize your safety and your hygiene. So we use those as well and recommend those. In addition, it's also a good idea to have either a cooler at the ready if you're close to your home or your vehicle, or what I personally like to do is have some kind of game bag that I can put the quarters into. And this does a couple of things. It allows me to transport the quarters out easily in sort of a packaged situation. And you can use either something that's marketed as a game bag, like a cheesecloth type product, or personally I like to use old pillowcases. As long as they are cotton or a poly-cotton mixture, you can use a pillowcase, take the quarters out, put them in the pillowcases, and then when you're finished, just make sure you clean out all the leaves and debris you happen to get in there, any hair, and then just wash them and bleach them, and you'll have them ready for use next time you go hunting. And I'll demonstrate how I put the quarters in there in just a moment. So with that, without any further ado, I'll get started and demonstrate the technique. All right, so I'm first going to make a cut at the base of the neck. Basically just going to cut through the hide and make it a little access port for me to get my skinning knife into. And I'm going to cut straight down the spine. And again, the beauty of the skinning knife, and you can also use a gut hook, which is on the back of the blade, the back side of the blade or the tip of many field dressing knives. But the beauty is that you keep the blade away from both the muscle groups, so you keep those intact, keep out leaves and debris, and then of course if you're interacting with the entrails or the chest cavity at all, you keep your blade away from that. And so basically I have one cut longitudinally down the spine. I'm going to make another couple of incisions running down the legs. All the way down to what we might refer to as the knee, and depending on whether it's the front or the back leg, it's not actually necessarily the knee, but the middle of the leg. The lower legs we'll just discard later when we have the quarters removed. And something you want to keep in mind when you're doing this technique or field dressing in general is you do want to avoid these glands. They're tarsal glands, and they're not glands in the sense that there are hormones secreted to them from the inside of the body, but they're referred to as glands. They're basically just pockets of skin, and they're enlarged oil glands in the hairs, and between those, the oil that's secreted and the urination that the deer do on those glands, they're used for scent marking and communication among deer, but they contain a variety of bacteria, and so you want to avoid those glands so that you don't contaminate your meat and potentially get sick yourself. So I've made my initial cuts with the skinning knife, and basically I'm going to begin with a quarter. I'm going to start with the front quarter, and I'm basically just going to tease away the hide from the quarter. And again, I'm going to try to keep my muscle groups intact, avoid cutting into the muscles. So I'm basically just going to separate the hide and any fat that's underlying the hide from the front quarter. There'll be some superficial muscles as well that you will cut into, cut across. Don't worry about those. And I'm cutting almost straight down onto the hide at times, but as long as you don't use, if you have a sharp knife, you're not using very much pressure, you won't sever the hide. But if you do, unless you're planning to tan the hide, it's not a problem. So again, I'm cutting down to this sort of knee joint, which I'm going to sever, actually encircle the joint with the knife and sever all the ligaments, tendons, connective tissue. What I'm going to do here is just pull down the hide away from the spine a little bit, which is going to expose the back strap and then also expose the quarters a little better for me, and also gets the hair out away from the muscle groups, minimize the amount of hair you have on your meat that you have to clean off later. So again, I'm just teasing back the hide from the muscles underlying the hide. Something I didn't mention earlier, I personally like to use is a set of knee pads. So I never know the site where I down a deer, if I'm going to have a lot of rocks and sticks, and you can really save your knees. And there are a variety of ways people do this in terms of the cuts people made. I'm just showing you a technique that, in terms of the cut down the spine and then down each leg, that I personally like and have come to use over the years. When you're making your cuts, just be careful and avoid, if you're cutting near your fingers, be careful that way because you can easily get yourself. I'm going to separate the hide here just below the knee. It's definitely good, helpful to have a razor sharp knife, but do be careful. Again, it's very easy to cut yourself. I've done it several times, especially these replaceable blade knives are surgical. You literally use a surgical blade with them. And here on the back side of the shoulder, there literally is no joint like a ball type joint that connects the front shoulder to the body. It's basically connective tissue and muscle. So you can come in behind the shoulder blade, the scapula, and separate this entire quarter from the body just by making cuts through soft tissue. So some of the tissue or some of the muscle back behind the front quarter, you can come back and reclaim later. We'll capture some of that in the demonstration today, but with the carcass you're going to have some cuts of meat you can come back and harvest when you're finished with one side after you've taken off the quarters, the back strap, and the inner loin. You'll have again some flank meat, some brisket meat, and those kind of trim ups we're not going to show in the demo today, but you can use those for soups and stews, for jerky, a lot of different things like that. So I'm just going to continue cutting in behind the shoulder blade. You'll see it here exposed. And I'm going to cut down into this flank and beginning of the brisket meat to expose the entire quarter. And again, I'm not getting into the chest cavity. I'm just going to take the quarter in its entirety off. All right, so there we have the front quarter. Again, I'm going to keep it clean, keeping it out of the leaves and debris. I'm going to separate the front joint, and I'll tell you what I'm going to do just from past experience. I found that it's helpful to go ahead and put the quarter as soon as you get it off into your game bag or into your pillowcase, and then you keep it absolutely clean. So I'm going to put that down into my pillowcase. And it's helpful as you go. If you have any clumps of hair, go ahead and pull those off and discard them, just less you have to worry about later on. So I'm going to take the knee joint, and where it bends, I'm going to cut kind of straight into it and circle it and cut through this connective tissue that holds it together, and then I can discard the lower leg. Just about there. You can also use some muscle yourself and separate that part of the way once you get most of the soft tissue cut. Twisting sometimes is helpful. All right, so the lower leg is severed. We can discard that. We have a quarter off, and that immediately begins to cool. If it's a warm day like it is today, you can see I'm in short sleeves. Just make sure you keep that in the shade. And I didn't mention it earlier, but it's also helpful to put your deer carcass in the shade. So that way, as you're working, the muscles cool as you get the hide pulled back away from the muscle. So the next step, I'm going to go to the rear quarter, what a lot of us call the ham. And we're going to again tease the hide back away from the muscle. Take care not to get into the abdomen. If you do happen to pierce the abdomen, get into intestines or stomach, one of the stomachs, for example, you just have to adapt from there. You probably, if you have a single cut, could have some digestive material that starts to eke out of the body cavity, and you just have to work quickly, try to avoid getting as much of that as possible on your meat, because then you'll have to trim that away later on. You could try to wash it off, or you can just trim it as you go if you do happen to get any contamination on your meat. So I'm going to pull again the hide away from the quarter. This is a process that can be done really quickly. If you're not narrating and trying to be really careful, you can do this with the hide on. Some people do sometimes to keep the meat as clean as possible, and also just to expedite the process, you can do it in as little as 10 minutes. I usually take about 20 to 30 minutes, just taking care not to get into the viscera, the guts. And again, I'm avoiding the inner part of the leg here around the tarsal gland, just to avoid getting into those bacteria that are held there. And I'm going to go ahead and separate. Well, actually, I can leave that intact. You could separate the these tendons if you like, but since we're going to separate or cut here at the knee, it's not necessary. You can't do that. I'm going to begin a cut around the leg here again, just below the joint. If you do happen to get into the gland with your hands, what I typically do is just change my gloves. So if I happen to inadvertently touch that, I'll just put on a new glove. It's a good idea to have several pairs of gloves with you in case you were to tear or cut your gloves, or again get one contaminated with stomach contents or from the tarsal gland. Some people take duct tape, and if they're doing a traditional field dressing technique, they'll wrap their tarsal glands in duct tape or a plastic bag or something like that, and then tape them off. Some people save them and try to use them for attractants. Personally, I just leave them with the hide, and so I've just kept them intact here. And I'm going to separate the hide from the leg again. And since those glands don't go below the surface of the skin, you don't have to, as long as you remove the hide in one piece, you don't have to worry about contaminating your gloves, your hands, or your meat. All right, so worked around the tarsal gland. Again, just working the hide off to fully expose the ham. And again, as we do this, this muscle is cooling immediately. As opposed to leaving the hide on, I like to go ahead and take the hide off when I do the quartering. So the muscle is cooling. That's really the single biggest thing you can do in terms of meat quality, is get the muscles cooled down as quickly as possible. It's going to result in a much better tasting product in the end. All right. So again, here I'm up against the abdomen, but I'm staying away from it with my knife. And here's where you have to be a little bit careful, because you do have your reproductive tract. You have the rest of the entrails in the abdomen, and if you cut in this direction down towards the abdomen, you could pierce the abdominal wall. What you want to do is basically just, when you get to the hip on the inside of the thigh here, inside of the ham, you want to make sure when you're cutting that you stay inside the muscle. So I'm going to lose a very thin layer of muscle here to make sure I don't cut down into the abdomen. And eventually I'm going to be right up against the actual pelvis, the hip bones. And so I'm cutting into the muscle, again, keeping my blade away from the abdomen. The femoral artery here, so you'll have some blood. And except for the two femoral arteries, you really don't have a lot of blood with this process. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but having blood, but we're going to keep most of the blood internal to the deer. So there's the femoral artery has been severed, and it's going to bleed again. I'm keeping my blade in muscle so I don't get into the abdomen. Okay, this hip joint actually came apart really easy. Sometimes when you're cutting down to the hip joint, you'll hit one side or the other of the seam of the joint, and then you'll kind of have to work yourself to the seam. But in this case, I actually came down right to it. And so basically you just separate the ball and the socket. You don't have to get into the reproductive organs, and depending on where you're hunting and the current regulations, you may be required to maintain proof of sex on your animal, and that's pretty simple. You can basically just take the scrotum or the penis and leave it attached by skin to your quarter. So you can leave a piece of skin running to that. You don't have to actually keep any other parts of the reproductive tract there. And if it's a female, you can keep the udders with it, or the labia attached. So again, I'm just working through the muscle. I've actually hit hip bone here. So I'm going to cut around the hip joint. So I'm not getting into the anus or rectum here. I'm staying up against the hip bone, the pelvis. Sometimes it's helpful if you're not sure if you're up against a bone or soft tissue, you can just take your hand and feel for that. So there's the hip bone, very rigid. There's a point right here that you have to work up to and cut around. I'm working here on the end of the back strap where it attaches the lower back to the ham. And again, you're going to have some little pieces of meat that you'll leave behind just to avoid getting in the entrails, and that's fine. And then you'll have some that are large enough you can actually harvest, you can salvage after you've severed your quarter. On the back side, I'm just going to cut down along the spine, right along the spine. Usually there's some back fat here. Beginning of the tail. So we're going to begin to separate the tissues that are holding this ham on at the back. Almost got it severed here to the spine. I'll turn my knife along the spine and cut inward. So I've separated the ham at the back, and I'm just cutting any residual muscle that connects it to the hip. And now we have the ham separated. You can see there's very little hair, no dirt, no leaves attached to the meat, so it's very, very clean. And again, it's cooling as we speak. And right now I'm going to separate the knee. I'm going to go ahead and cut through this tendon, which is very tough. And I'm going to find this knee joint and find where it bends and make a 90-degree cut on both ends or both sides to separate that joint. Cut all the way around. This will dull your knife, but it's a necessary part, at least if you're going to remove the lower leg before you take the quarters out. Some people, you could keep the lower leg on and use those as points of attachment if you're going to pack it out without a cover, like in a game bag or a pillowcase. And I'm going to go ahead and pack up my ham here before I remove the lower leg, lest I drop it off the body and get some dirt or some leaves on there. Again, I have almost no hairs on there, which is wonderful. I'll put that right in the pillowcase or in the game bag. And get back to work on this joint. And you can bend the joint back and forth, the same for the front leg. Bend the joint back and forth and you can see how it articulates, how it bends, where the connective tissue is around the bone or bones. This back leg is a little more complex, or at least the joint, the way it fits together, it's kind of a tongue and groove. So it's a little more challenging sometimes to get severed or cut apart. Again, sometimes you can twist and free that up more and expose any residual soft tissue. There's the back leg. Again, we'll discard that. Keep our knife clean. I usually rest it on the body cavity or on the ground where there's grass or clean leaves. And there's the ham. Again, we're going to set that aside in the shade so it can continue to cool. And at this point, I'm going to work on the back strap, or the longissimus muscle that runs down the entire spine. It's kind of the creme de la creme of the deer for most hunters. And then also we're going to get the inner loin, or what many people refer to as the tenderloin, on the inside. And again, we're going to do that without getting into the entrails or the guts. All right, so the next muscle group I'm going to work with is this long, literally a longitudinal muscle that runs from the neck all the way to the spine, and I get as much as I can of that entire for cooking later on, in addition to cutting steaks or medallions with this back strap or longissimus muscle. It's also good to keep in packages or in roasts, or for grilling purposes, keep it entire, and then you can rub it or marinate it as you like, and keeps the juices sealed in when it's a larger piece. So I'm going to tease back a little bit of the hide, not a whole lot, because I want to keep that in place to keep the bottom half of the deer clean, or the muscles free of debris. All right, so at this point I'm going to make a cut up here at the neck and sever this muscle. And I'm also, actually, before I do that, something I personally like to do is cut along the spine. So I find the spine, I come on the side that I'm working, and I cut. Just don't cut too deeply, but I'm going to cut along the spine, use the spine as my guide with my knife, and that's the point, the inside edge or the spine side edge of that longissimus muscle. So I'm going to pull back, I'm going to cut away and pull back this membrane that is hiding the back strap. And I'm just going to, you can either cut it off, or if it will stay in place, depending on the slope you're working with, you can sometimes just fold it over. If you're familiar with working up your own deer, that is processing your own deer in a garage or in a barn or a cooler, you've probably done this with the viscera, the guts removed and hanging. So we're just doing it on the ground alongside the animal. All right, sometimes this will stay up like that, out of the way. All right, so I'm going to make some cuts on either end of the back strap. And again, I use that spine as my guide for my knife. I'm going to sever up here by the neck. Keep as much of that intact as possible. What we have is kind of a V-shaped groove or notch between the ribs, the rib cage, which sweep around the sides of the deer, and the spine. And this is where the first place I like to use a fillet knife, because it's long and I'm less apt to poke down in the abdomen through the ribs, which I've done before and punctured a stomach or intestine. I'm going to make a cut to separate the back strap up here towards the end at the neck. And then I'm going to take my fillet knife and begin to tease the muscle. And I'm going to keep the blade of my knife parallel to the spine, so that I'm not poking the tip of my knife down into the rib cage and below. And I'm going to cut, again, like with the spine, I'm going to use the rib cage right here, which is hard, although they're separated, obviously. I'm going to use that as a guide for my fillet knife, which is flexible. And we'll cut along those ribs very nicely and keep as much of the meat together as possible without making inadvertent cuts into it. So at the base of the ribs, the back, the tail end of the ribs, we have, or the longer ribs, we have short ribs. And so when you get to this point, you can feel the abdominal wall, not the ribs. It's not rigid. So here you have to be careful, and this is where the fillet knife for me comes in handy, especially for protecting me from cutting into those abdominal tissues or membranes and below. And you can cut, again, keep your blade parallel to the spine to keep yourself from cutting deeper. My fillet knife is fairly sharp, but it's not as sharp as the replaceable blade surgical knife. It's a little bit more work. I'm going to keep this muscle out of the dirt. And if you've got it severed at the end, you can use that as a handle. And now you can tease along the ribs down to the spine and remove the rest of the back strap. There is a place here where the hip joins the spine where you can't cut any further. You kind of have to end your back strap cut here. All right, again, be careful not to cut down into the body cavity. We are just about there. All right, so our back strap is now freed up. I check it, make sure there's no debris on there before I bag it. And what I typically do is I'll carry a few bags with me, depending on if I get a deer or two. And then I'll put maybe one side of a deer in one bag and another side in another. Keep those in the shade to cool off. At this point, I'm gonna remove the inner loin or the tenderloin, and often, especially on younger deer, this muscle is so tender that we can remove it without a knife. Sometimes though, cutting the ends and maybe even teasing it away from the inside of the rib cage is necessary. But what I do is I find the last long rib and come down to these short ribs along the spine, and either with my fingers or with a knife, I'll make a very small incision, or I'll tear this tissue that is basically the outside of the abdominal wall that is going to keep your intestines and your stomachs and everything else intact there. And then I find you have this muscle just right on the inside of the short ribs, and often it's layered with fat, as this dough is. And again, sometimes you can find the end of this linear muscle and pull it away from the ribs with your hands, basically just feeling along to where the muscle ends and then pulling it loose. Sometimes it'll get really stringy. In this case, it's pretty tender. I was able to pull it apart with my hand without making too much of a mess. Sometimes it'll hold on. What I do is I put my hand on the inside, the abdominal wall side of that tenderloin, to make sure I don't cut there, and I make some gentle cuts right along the inside of the rib cage and along the spine if needed, to separate the muscle where it's connected to the spine. Okay, I've freed it up on that end. I'm going to take the other end and attempt to free it up. And sometimes, again, the muscles they run linear, and I'm just cutting here on top of the muscle, not getting down into it, and staying away from the abdominal wall. This deer is very healthy, a lot of fat there. Okay, I've got my hand around the tenderloin and I've got my fingers on the back side. I'm going to carefully make a few teasing cuts and pull that away from where it's connected to the spine. And the same here. And a lot of folks will take this tenderloin fresh and season it and pan fry it with eggs, have it for breakfast, or you can season it, bake it. It's a wonderful way to enjoy your deer immediately because it's such a tender cut of meat. So there's our inner loin or tenderloin. The larger the deer, the larger that cut's going to be. So I'm going to also put it in my game bag, let it cool. And again, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of flank and brisket and neck meat that you can cut. Obviously there's a substantial amount here. You can tease all that away. It takes some time, and for the sake of the video, we're going to speed this up. I'm going to do that off camera. But you take that meat off, and again, you can use it for, if it's a very large piece, for a roast, for a pan steak. You can use it for jerky, for lots of different things. But we're going to now proceed to the other side of the deer and remove the quarters there. All right, so at this point, I'm basically just going to cover the half the deer that I've worked with and remove the quarters from. And I'm going to roll this deer over by the legs. And because the hide is intact on the other side, it's all the meat is clean, and I'll begin working with it. So it's not a difficult process. If it was a really big animal like an elk, you would have to have somebody to help you do that, or use some kind of mechanical advantage, ropes or something like that. It'd be a little tougher by yourself, but so we're going to work on the other side the same way as we did on the first.
All right, now do you just want to do this other side and then...
So we've removed off the quarters, the front and the back quarter, the meat that we could salvage off the neck, the flank or the sides, and the brisket. We've taken off the back strap and the tenderloin on the inside of the rib cage and spine. And now all that's left is basically just disposing of the carcass. Again, one of the beauties of this method of quartering your deer, processing your deer, is you can leave the carcass in the woods, in the field. And if you're hunting on private property or on public land, just make sure you do that away from any road, access point, parking area, just out of courtesy to others who'll be using the property or the wildlife area. So we're going to dispose of the carcass, and we have our meat bagged up to put right on ice. All right, so we're going to take our quarters, get them on ice. So once you get your deer quarters on ice, if you keep them cooled below 40 degrees, between 32 and 40, you can age this deer for several days before you process it. Want to make a plug for our Field to Fork program. If you are interested in learning how to deer hunt or hunt in general, we have a program just for you. It's called Field to Fork. And through that program you can learn all the basics and learn how to process and cook your own venison. In addition, we'd encourage you to consider offering the landowner a portion of your harvest. If you're hunting on private land, it's a great way to thank the landowner. and ensure that you get to keep coming back to enjoy the property in the future.
All right, welcome to the University of Kentucky Meats Lab. I'm Dr. Greg Renfro, the Extension Meat Specialist here at UK, and you had just witnessed the gutless field dressing, and now we're bringing the carcass back here to the Meats Lab, and we're going to show you some ways of cutting this deer carcass up. There's no specific reason or rhyme or reason to cutting this carcass up. It's just whatever you want to do in your own imagination. But the very first thing I wanted to talk about is some equipment that you need. Obviously you need knives, need a sharpening, honing steel as well. You may need a hand saw, and something that you can get. A lot of this stuff you can get at any outdoor store or online. They're pretty easy to find. There's nothing real special about the knife, just various sizes. Or this saw is actually a bone saw, which you can get online as well. But common question we get is, I've cut the carcass up, what do I do with it now? How do I freeze it? How do I keep it fresh for months to come? And this is a vacuum bag, and again, you can go online or at a outdoor store and you can buy at-home vacuum packaging machines. That technology has come down in price over the last few years, and you can pick one up fairly cheaply, a nice little home kitchen vacuum packaging machine. And that's what this guy right here is. It's a vacuum bag. We'll put the meat in there and pull a seal on it and put it in the freezer, and as long as the seal stays intact, your deer meat or whatever wild game you put in there, even fresh meats that you buy for your kitchen, cheeses, things like that, it'll stay fresh inside this bag. And if you're going to freeze it, this is the best way. This is good for long-term freezer storage. The biggest problem we have with freezing is freezer burn. And these bags don't allow the moisture to escape and doesn't allow the oxygen to get in there, so we don't have any freezer burn in there, and they'll stay, as long as they're frozen and the vacuum package stays intact, they'll stay fresh for a long period of time in the freezer. Don't have to worry about spoilage or anything like that. We need to also discuss a little bit of food safety and the materials that you need. Don't be intimidated by the fact that we're doing this in an actual meat processing facility. You can do this at home, you can do this in your kitchen, you can do this in a garage, but we need to stress sanitation as well. For example, we have these nice big white butcher blocks that we cut from as well, and you can see we've got gloves on. Now I'm wearing cotton gloves underneath my latex gloves because we're dealing with the meat's going to be cold, and it helps keep my fingers and hands warm as well. I would recommend that you use latex gloves. The cotton underneath there is a personal preference, but most kitchens have their own cutting surfaces or cutting blocks or things like that. You can buy at any grocery store or discount store. You can buy disposable cutting blocks there as well, and so you can cut on that in your kitchen or your garage, or if you have a folding table, you can do things in your garage as well. So don't think you have to have this nice fancy meat slab to cut your deer up, but we do need to talk about sanitation. At home, you can buy the bleach wipes and you can wipe everything down, let it dry, and that'll kill any bacteria that's on the surface. Or if you don't have those, a rag with some rubbing alcohol on there, you can wipe everything down with that, including your knives and your saws and your cutting surface. Let that dry, and then you can work there on that surface with no bacteria on there. Or, again, this is a little spray bottle of sanitizer that we use here at the lab that would do little spot checks with this as well. So make sure we're keeping things safe. Realize, folks, that we are producing food, and we need to make sure everything stays safe so we don't cause foodborne illness to ourselves or to our families. All right, we've got our deer meat out of the cooler, and the folks at Fish and Wildlife are kind enough to put those in bags. They use either pillowcases, or you can buy game bags to haul your deer out in, or your elk, or whatever your you're going to cut up at home. Now, one of the things that we have a challenge with is when we process animals for human consumption, we do that in sanitary conditions, and we're able to keep things clean as we're processing those animals. However, when you take an animal out in the wild, you're dealing with a lot of different things. It's not the most ideal. So it's common to get pieces of dirt or grass, or you can see here we have a little bit of hair on here as well. The challenge we have with deer hair is it's hollow and it tends to stick really well. You can do what we do in the meats industry as an intervention, to where we would spray this carcass down with a 10% solution of acetic acid, which is vinegar, and that will help kill any bacteria that are on there. An old professor of mine who was an avid hunter would talk about the deer hair on here, and he would actually use a blowtorch to kind of singe the hair and wash it off, so you can use that as well. So making sure we keep everything clean and sanitary as much as we can is the utmost importance. Now, what's interesting about these cuts that we have here is the deer kind of tell us a little bit about what's going on. And for example, notice the color of the fat on these deer here. It's a white colored fat. That is kind of an indication of what the animal's been eating. If an animal was eating solely grass or some sort of forage, the fat would be a little bit more yellow. If they're getting some grain in their diet, their fat is going to be a little bit more white. And what's kind of interesting about this is a lot of folks ask, what causes meat flavor, whether it is deer or beef or pork. A lot of times animals will taste like what they've been consuming. Grass-fed beef tastes different than grain-fed beef, all right? And so deer are no different. I would venture to say that the deer in western Kentucky, where we have a lot of row crops, are going to taste different than the deer from eastern Kentucky, where they're going to be mainly munching on forage and things like that. So the flavors of the animals are going to depend on what they've been consuming themselves. Another question we often get is, how does venison or deer meat compare with beef as far as nutritionally? Both products are very high in protein. The protein that's in meats is very bioavailable. You're going to digest around 90 to 95% of that protein. What makes venison less caloric is it doesn't have as much fat as beef. We have been raising cattle for decades and selecting those cattle to store their excess energy or fat as marbling, and so they'll have a higher fat content. And fat in and of itself has a higher calorie count than actual meat. So venison will be a little bit less calories than beef, and what those exact numbers are, I'm not for sure, because there's a lot of factors that go into that. All right, before we delve into this, I think it's important to reiterate what we've already talked about, is making sure that as soon as we take these pieces off of here, we get them in the game bags, we get them under ice to get them cooled down as soon as possible, especially when we're dealing with animals taken in the wild. Sometimes we take them when it's nice and cold outside. Sometimes we take the animals when it's a little bit more warmer outside. So we need to get that cooled down as soon as possible, so whatever bacteria on there, we can slow them down, all right? So what we're looking at here is we've got the back leg, or the ham of the deer. You can see here we have the femur joint where they've went in there and cut that off of the carcass. We're also looking at the other ham as well, and a few other pieces that kind of came with that. We'll talk about those later. A lot of folks will ask us when it comes to flavor why deer is so gamey, and again, it goes back to what they've been consuming, like we have already talked about. But with deer, it's a little bit different than livestock that we're using for food. In the meats industry, we will stun an animal and then bleed the animal, and it gets the blood out of there. However, deer is kind of a different thing, where we're going to shoot them, the heartbeat stops, and so we don't have a way of getting a lot of that blood out of there. So the combination of some blood in here, some lean tissue, as well as what the animal's been been consuming gives it that gamey flavor that folks talk about there. Another way to kind of control the gamey flavor, what some folks will do is they will brine the carcass. They will get a solution of water and salt, and they will soak that the meat in there, and that helps draw out some of that blood. Kind of the kosher method. Basically, in the meats industry, the kosher beef is brined in a saltwater solution to help pull more of that blood out. And you can do that with these deer meat as well. You can brine those, and not only does that help pull some of that out, but it also make them a little bit juicier as well. We've talked about flavor. We talked about how we can handle the gaminess of the meat. Let's talk a little bit about tenderness. All right. What we have here are the two back legs of this animal. There's a lot that goes into tenderness. Tenderness is a very complex subject. We know that muscles of locomotion like these versus muscles of support like the back straps or the loins have different tenderness. All right. These tend to be tougher. Muscles of support tend to be more tender. And what that is the muscle fibers, just like when you go to the gym and you lift weights, you hope your muscle fibers get bigger. And when they get bigger, they need more connective tissue to help hold things in place. And so these muscles of locomotion, like these legs, they've been moving around, and especially if you've seen deer move and jump and run, they get worked a lot. And so those muscle fibers are bigger and they've got a lot more connective tissue. Whereas muscles from the loin, as you can see in this guy, all that's doing is supporting the skeleton, and it doesn't get used very much. And much like if you don't use a muscle or exercise it, it doesn't get very big. So the muscle fibers stay smaller, don't get as much connective tissue as well. That's one aspect of tenderness. Another one that's a little bit harder to control in wildlife is how old that animal was. The older the animal gets, the more connective tissue it develops. And the more connective tissue it develops, the tougher it's going to be. The big thing with deer is to get the buck with the big set of antlers. And a lot of times that animal may be several years old, making him a lot more tougher. Happens in humans as well. We're not as flexible when we get older as we were when we were younger, and because we've developed more connective tissue as well. Another aspect of tenderness goes back to the aging of the carcass. Beef carcasses are aged, pork carcasses are aged. Usually they're aged inside a vacuum bag. We call that wet aging. However, dry aging, which is popular in the beef industry, is where we let the carcass hang for several days to a few weeks to make that carcass more tender. We don't have that luxury with deer because beef carcasses have a lot of fat cover on them. Deer don't have a lot of fat, whereas you can see these legs here, there's not a lot of fat on there. If this was a beef carcass, this would be covered in fat. And the reason why I bring that up, because I can put that in my cooler, that beef carcass, and that fat helps protect the evaporative loss. These guys are 70 to 75% water. And obviously inside a cooler, we get that evaporative effect there. And so we're going to we get what we call a carcass shrink. Well, the fat kind of helps that. And so if we were to set this in the if we were to set this in the cooler and let this carcass age, it's really just going to dry out quite a bit. And we're going to have to cut all that dried surface off. So our yield on this is going to be less. However, you can still age this. Like we talked about earlier with the vacuum bag, you can put your deer meat in a vacuum bag, put it in your refrigerator, and it'll age inside that vacuum bag, much like we do with the beef and pork and lamb that we produce today. We let it age in that vacuum bag, that wet aging. So you can do that to make these guys a lot more tender. The big thing that affects tenderness, and it doesn't matter if it's the livestock that we buy at the grocery stores, the beef, pork, and lamb and chicken, or if it's the degree of doneness when you cook it. Obviously, the more we cook things, the drier it's going to get and the tougher it's going to get as well. Now, a lot of people get a little nervous because, you told me bacteria dies off at around 160, 170 degrees, and that's true, but bacteria doesn't have the ability to bore through the middle of the muscle, so it stays on the surface. Most of the times when we cook, we're cooking at a surface temperature of over 300 degrees, so that bacteria is going to die off. So as long as we use common sense things like not cross-contaminating, meaning that I'm going to cut this carcass up on this butcher block and then go back and make a salad on the same block without cleaning and sanitizing. That's cross-contamination. We want to avoid that kind of stuff. And so we can age these carcasses in the vacuum bag to make them more tender, then watch your degree of doneness, and that will help make sure you have a nice tender product. All right, we've talked about food safety. We've talked about some tenderness, some ways of storing this. Let's get down into cutting this deer carcass up. And we'll start with these legs. Again, there's no right or wrong way of doing this. It's however you want to do it. And I'm going to show you a few things that you can do that maybe you haven't thought about before, and trying to cross a little bit of some typical meat cuts with some of the deer as well. Now, when we get started, obviously we need a sharp knife, and what a lot of folks don't realize, is kind of a little tip here, that if you look at the edge of that knife under a microscope, it's not a smooth edge. And what you see are little fingers or feathers is what the industry calls it. And as I'm cutting, those feathers get bent. And so I'm going to use this steel to straighten those feathers out. So this steel will not sharpen the knife, it'll hone it. Eventually you're going to have to go to the stone and put an edge on that knife, but always make sure you have a sharp knife. You know, the old thing is you're more likely to cut yourself with a dull knife than you are a sharp knife, but I can tell you from experience, folks, that you still can cut yourself with a sharp knife, and it's going to do a lot more damage. So always make sure we practice knife safety. You know, a big thing is don't try to catch a falling knife. But let's start with this leg here. What's kind of interesting here, folks, is the way they've taken this leg off, we've got a little bit of that sirloin on there. So if you wanted to come in here and cut straight across here, okay, get around some of that bone, that hip bone there, you take that sirloin off. And a lot of folks don't like the flavor of beef fat, or excuse me, a lot of folks don't like the flavor of deer fat, and so we can take that off. And you can see this deer obviously has had some grain. It's a nice white colored fat there. All right, nice white colored fat. And so we'll take some of that off, and just for time's sake, we'll pretend we take more of that off. And you can get another knife here, get a little bigger knife. And you do some, face this up a little bit. Now here in a second, I'm going to talk about trimming and making sausage. Oh, we got a little bit of a teaching moment here, folks. If you see right here at the tip of my knife, as we focus in on this, there's kind of a light to maybe a dark brown colored kind of rubbery gland in there. That's a lymph gland, and you're going to see lymph glands all through this carcass. And myself, as well as our friends at the Fish and Wildlife, they get a lot of phone calls over that kind of stuff. I got these rubbery things on my carcass, they're brown on my deer carcass. What is that? Well, those are lymph glands, all right? It's very common. Now, when they're brown like this, that means that lymph gland is healthy, that the animal is healthy. Where I get nervous about these lymph glands is when they get black. If you see an actual lymph gland and it's black, that makes me a little nervous, because that may mean that animal gotten into something and has a disease. So brown lymph glands are good, the animal is healthy. Black ones, we need to be cognizant of that. And if you see a black lymph gland, please contact somebody in Fish and Wildlife or myself, and we can kind of guide you through that kind of stuff. But you're going to see those lymph glands throughout the carcass there. And so it's no big deal. We're just going to cut these guys off of here, okay? And so get a knife here. It's kind of interesting. This is actually part of what we call the inside round, or the inside ham, and then this is the gluteus medius of there. So you got to, basically, if it was beef, you'd be looking at a top sirloin, all right? And so essentially what you can do is just cut things. You want them an inch thick, you can do that, okay? I'm a big fan of making everything an inch thick. I think that's the right size for a lot of folks, okay? We got our sirloin steaks there. Now we got the rest of this leg, and you can do a lot of different things with this leg. Again, you know, take the fat off of there if you want. Like I said, some folks like the flavor of deer fat, others don't. I've run across hunters that were very adamant about stripping all the fat off of there, and others that say, well, if you get the deer at the right time of the year, it's not that bad. And so it's totally up to you what you want to do with that. But as we look at this leg here, you can see this is the ball of the femur. So it's the joint that moves the leg. That femur is going to run right through here down to this part of the knee. And so what you can do is this big quadriceps muscle here, you can come in here with your knife, and what you can't tell is my knife tip is right on top of that femur bone. And I'm just going to follow that on down here, okay? And some folks like having the bone in there, others don't. And so what I'm going to do is take that quadriceps muscle out. Now, how this equates is to beef is we're talking about the knuckle or the tip. And you can see all I'm really doing, folks, is following that on around. Now, coming up under here, there's another bone in here. This is your kneecap. I'm going to take that guy off. There's the kneecap. What I like to do is come up underneath the femur. Okay? And what I'm looking for inside here, there is a seam. Okay? Let's see if we can find that seam. And that seam will help you, guide you in taking that guy, that knuckle off of there. Okay? All right. You can see there's that seam there. And the seam has connective tissue around it. What that connective tissue does is it's put on there so that the muscles can slide over each other, all right? So you got to realize we've taken a living system and we've turned it into food, and so we have to deal with what evolution has put in there, okay? So we're going to take this knuckle off of here. Okay? Set this off to the side. Now, we have that knuckle. Got this little cap on top of here. What's interesting is this little cap, to equate to beef, is actually the tri-tip, all right, which is a popular cut of beef in California there. But we can take that off of there, leave that over the side if you want to mess with that. Now you have a nice little roast here, okay? Take the kneecap off of there, and so you have a nice little knuckle roast. Or what some folks I've seen do with these guys is we'll face it up and start cutting steaks. Now these, since it's a big muscle of locomotion, you'll probably go down to a 1/2 inch in thickness there. Now a lot of times, you know, with, you know, kind of going back to the flavor thing that we talked about earlier, you can marinate these guys, you know, whatever flavor marinate you want. When I was a kid growing up, my stepmother cooked a lot of deer and used a lot of soy sauce as a marinade for that as well. And so these steaks right here would work really well for a tenderizing marinade. Usually tenderizing marinades ask that you keep it in the marinade for more than 12 hours or so. Not to be confused with the flavor marinades where you see on the jar says marinate for 30 minutes. Those are marinades designed to add flavor. But these big muscles of locomotion we have here, they would be more ideal for a tenderizing marinade. And again, you can find anything on the internet. You could probably find a good tenderizing marinade on the internet for those as well. And so now we have the knuckle. We can come in here. Let me get my knife out of the way. We can finish taking that femur bone out of there. Okay. And again, just kind of following that on around. Okay, I'm going to come in from the other side. Take that femur out of there. Okay, just like so. And what I'm going to do is just kind of follow it on down around, okay? So we have a little bit of meat on the shank here. You can actually cut this meat off of here. Okay. I'm going to put it in my lug over here. Another thing you're going to need is, you can see we got this blue tote over here. We call these lugs in the meat industry. You're going to need one of those to put your product in there as well. Now, again, reason why I'm throwing it in here is not throwing this meat on the leg away. What I'm doing is throwing it in this lug because what we're going to talk about in the end is making sausage out of these guys. And so that's what you can do with that. And we have this, cut this little tendon off here because that's going to be tough. And so again, got a nice leg roast. You can separate those muscles. There's a seam on the inside. You can see I'm cutting through that seam, pulling that open. Okay. A lot of times cutting meat, folks, is just finding the right seams and cutting through those seams. Again, you can see we found another one of those lymph glands. Nice, brown, bright lymph gland. Means a healthy animal. So don't be alarmed if you see those. We're going to take that out of there. There's your nice leg roast. Now, see this muscle, series of muscles here? This is called the heel. And I'm going to show you something here in a second. This is probably something that you want to go ahead and throw in your grinder, this guy right here. This guy is one of the main muscles that helps move that knee there. And so when he's that away, you can kind of see there, you can see a lot of connective tissue in there. Again, this is a big muscle of locomotion, so he's working a lot, so he's fairly tough. You can roast him and slow roast him, or use cook him in liquid like you would a crock pot or something like that to loosen that up. But for the most part, a lot of hunters and a lot of do-it-yourselfers will throw that in the grinder and grind that up for deer sausage. All right. And again, we can come in here and clean all this up. Okay. Now, let me show you something a little fun. All right. Show you something a little fun. This is, if this was a beef animal, we call this piece right here a top round. Okay. Top round. And what's interesting is what sits on top of here is another little muscle. It's a little bitty flat muscle. I call these sheet muscles. We can tease these off. And what we have found out with beef, that this little muscle that sits on top of here, his Latin name is the gracilis muscle, that you can pull him off. He kind of cooks like a skirt steak, if you will, or the meat that we would use to make fajita. So he kind of acts like that as well. The other thing that we've noticed, and I'm going to hopefully get a close-up of this, this looks like one muscle, but in reality it's two. One muscle here, one muscle here. And you can see where I've kind of pulled it apart here, right there. This little muscle right here, he's called the adductor, is his Latin name, the adductor. And what we've done in the beef carcass is we've cut that guy out, okay? Once again, because this is a big muscle of locomotion, we always assume that this adductor was tough as well. But in reality, even though he's surrounded by a bunch of muscles of locomotion, he doesn't get used very much, so he stays fairly tender. And so we pull this out, and we can cut him up into steaks, and he's fairly tender. Now in the beef industry, they're calling that a San Antonio cut. So you can see we've got our using the beef carcass as a model, we've got the San Antonio cuts that are going to cook and eat just like a top sirloin. And so once again, there's no right or wrong way of doing this. What I'm doing is just kind of crossing up some of the beef and pork cuts that we have and utilizing that knowledge in our deer carcass here, just having some fun with it. And so we've got our top round, our bottom ham, if you will. These guys are more conducive to roasting because they are big muscles of locomotion. Our knuckle right here is also more ideal for a roasting type thing. Whereas we got our sirloin and our San Antonio cuts that are more conducive to maybe throwing on the grill or cooking in the skillet. All right, we've cut up the leg and we show you some neat, unique cuts out of the hind leg. And now we're looking at the front shoulder of the animal. Now this is what I think is extremely fascinating about the anatomy of any animal that walks on four legs, whether it was this deer that we're processing today or livestock is this front leg, so we got the hoof all the way up to the shoulder blade, is not attached to the rest of the skeleton. And I think that's neat. And when you're doing that field dressing, what the game wardens were showing you is they were able to cut through that and not cut any bone at all. So the front end of that animal is held in place by muscle, okay? Again, going back to what we talked about with tenderness, that means there's not, you know, very tender cuts in there because it's holding the front end of the animal up. The other thing I think is really neat is not only is the front end held together by muscle, but a lot of the weight of that animal is percentage-wise is going to be up towards the front. So that tells you a lot more about those guys, those muscles inside there as well. And so just because this is a big muscle of locomotion through here, we got a lot of those muscles in there, doesn't mean there's not some tender cuts inside there. And one of the things I'm going to show you is another thing I find fascinating. Now you see me rubbing this, and what I'm looking for is what we have underneath here is the shoulder blade. Now something that we got to discuss here is when we deal with the shoulder, before we get to that unique cut I'm going to show you, things you've got to be careful of is a lot of times when you shoot the animal, you're shooting right into one of these shoulders here, okay? And when you shoot, you could hit the shoulder blade, you could hit a rib, and so you're going to get a lot of bone fragment in there. As well as now you can see through here, we got a bit of contamination from that gunshot. It's always a good idea, don't take the risk of just going in here and cutting that gunshot out of there, or not even using that muscle at all where the gunshot was, because you can introduce some contamination because of that gunshot, or we get bone fragments, or depending on the type of ammunition you're using, you could get some lead fragments or bullet fragments in there as well. So it's always a good idea to cut that out. And if you're really concerned about that, you can kind of palpate around there and see if you can find any bone fragments or bullet fragments there. So we're going to set that off to the side there. But you can see the shoulder blade is what we're dealing with now. And the shoulder blade has a bone protrusion that comes up here. It's called the medial ridge. And you can feel right there is the bone. And you go either side and there's no bone. And what's kind of neat is what I'm going to do is take my knife and follow that medial ridge. Okay, just like so. And again, using kind of the beef as a model, this is one of those muscles that's inside here that the animal doesn't use very much, okay? This series of muscles in here is part of the rotator cuff. And we hear rotator cuff a lot with baseball pitchers that tear rotator cuffs. We don't have that issue in animals because they don't throw fastballs or curveballs. So this is a muscle that doesn't get used very much. And you can see inside there, all I've really done is followed that medial ridge where my thumb is and kind of pull back on that. And you can see we've done such a good job. We actually taking the covering of the bone off of there. And then I'm going to take my knife and flatten it out. Okay, again, following that seam there. Kind of teasing all that out of there. All the way down. Pulling that guy out. Now, that piece right there, all right? In the beef carcass, we call that the flat iron steak, all right? It's, in the beef animal, it's the second most tender cut on the carcass. This cut right here, which is the tenderloin, is the most tender on there. So if you could translate that, since animal follows the same type of movement as a beef animal, that this would stay fairly tender as well. Now the challenge we have with this flat iron is, in the beef industry, we come in here and cut the meat off the top, and then we cut the meat off the bottom of this vein of connective tissue that you see right there, okay? And we would get a flat iron steak by taking the meat off the top and the bottom of that vein of connective tissue. You could probably do that on this deer carcass, but you're not going to have a whole lot left. However, you still can cook that with that vein of connective tissue in there and kind of either cut around that as you're consuming it, or go ahead and it may soften up enough because it's not as big as it would be in a beef carcass. But So there you go, a deer flat iron steak here. Cut that off, make it look a little bit better there, okay? Now, we've taken the flat iron off of this deer carcass. There's another muscle on the other side, and this is what I think is really fascinating. Not only do I think it's fascinating that the front end of that animal's held in place by muscle, but this piece right here that I'm gonna pull out, okay, you can kind of see them just, again, following it on around. It's a kind of a pencil-leaded shaped muscle, okay? Meaning that it's round and it tapers, kind of like a pencil lead, okay? That guy right there. Now, reason why I pulled that out, in the beef industry, we would call this a mock tender, okay? And the reason why it's called a mock tender is if we cut into him, he looks a lot like, if we cut into this tenderloin, okay, they look pretty similar. However, the reason he's called a mock because he's not tender at all. He's this guy right here, this mock tenderloin, is arguably one of the toughest cuts on the entire carcass. And this is what I think is unique about this thing. Again, this is all part of the rotator cuff. This muscle that came off here, right here, that we're going to call the deer flat iron steak, is one of the more tender cuts. This mock tender that comes off the other side is one of the toughest cuts, and they're separated by that little medial ridge on there. To me, I think that's fascinating. You may or may not think that's fascinating, but I guess that's why I do what I do, because I think this stuff is kind of neat as well. And so we pulled that off, and we got a flat iron steak. This, if you wanted to keep it as a roast, this mock tender, you could. It's up to you as well. The rest of this you can kind of take off as a roast. And again, all I'm gonna do is come in here and take this shoulder blade off of here. Okay, just using my knife to follow the lean on around there. What a lot of folks will do with this stuff, you know, like again, there's a lot of meat in here that you could, if you wanted to, you can see, just come in there, you can see how now all of a sudden that shoulder blade gets a little bit more pliable. And there's a joint that I'm gonna cut through. Okay. Just like so, see in there. That shoulder blade comes right off of there, okay? And then the rest of this you could trim up and remove for your sausage if you wanted to, okay? Because again, you know, outside of that flat iron cut there, the rest of this is going to be pretty tough, and so you would have to roast it or actually put it into deer sausage, okay? And I promise we're going to talk about that here fairly quickly. All right, so again, just kind of coming in here and deboning this, following the bone, taking a lot of that off. Some of you might want to clean it up a little bit better than I have. It's up to you, to be honest with you. Again, there's no right or wrong way of doing this. So whatever your imagination comes up with, as you can see there. You've seen us cut up the other shoulder, and we use a lot of the meat for a ground product or a sausage. The other shoulder, we could do something kind of fun with this, all right? Now, again, we're using kind of beef processing techniques and pork processing techniques to come up with some unique ideas for the deer as well. Now, this guy right here, because he is a big muscle of locomotion and there's a lot of little muscles in there, muscle fibers going everywhere, you can do something kind of fun with this, all right? What a lot of folks I've seen do, they'll put a nice rub on here, and then you can put it in your oven at a very, very low temperature. If you've got a smokehouse in your garage, a little bitty 20, 30 pound smokehouse that you can get those online, or you can go to another sporting goods store and get that. You can put that in in your little smokehouse at a very low temperature. You don't want to get it much above 225 degrees or so, and just let it sit in there and cook and absorb the smoke that you give that. Now, be careful when you use a smokehouse. Don't give it too much smoke, maybe an hour or an hour and a half's worth of smoke, because too much smoke, you impart bitter flavors. But what we're trying to do here, folks, is that slow and low temperature and that time is going to break down those muscle fibers and that connective tissue. And what we do in the pork industry, we'll do this a lot of times in the pork industry, we do that slow and low, and then when it comes out of the oven, we're talking 12 to 18 hours. You have to kind of play with it. But when you bring it out of here, you have to be extremely careful because it'll fall apart. And so now what you can do is shred this guy. And in the pork industry, we call that pulled pork. Now you could do this with the shoulder. You can even do that with the hams if you wanted to off of the deer, and you would have a pulled deer product that has that nice rub on the top of it. You give it a little bit of smoke, so you have kind of that smoky flavor, or you can put your favorite barbecue sauce or whatever you want to in there. And it's a way of kind of shredding that out of there and getting pulled deer meat, if you will. Or you can do that, sear it on both sides, roast it, and just let it kind of fall apart on its own in a soup stock, if you will. And once you get close to being done, add your vegetables, your carrots, your potatoes, your beans in there, and make like a vegetable soup, if you will, using the deer as the meat item in your vegetable soup. So again, using the pork techniques and the beef techniques to do something a little bit different with the deer meat. All right, we have another kind of neat teaching moment with this piece of the neck meat here. You can see we've got a little bit of a hair there, but see this big piece of connective tissue? It's a tendon, all right? And this is just a small piece of it. If you're actually to dissect this guy out, he attaches at the back of the head and kind of spreads throughout the front of the animal. And what this tendon does is, his Latin name is the ligament nuchae, believe it or not. It's a weird sounding name, but what his job is to do is to hold that head up, okay? And so you see that in there. Now, again, you're gonna have to cut that out and throw it away. There's no cooking that's gonna soften that up or anything like that. But it is just kind of makes an interesting topic for discussion, because it is a big tendon there, and a lot of folks will call and ask what that is, as well as the lymph glands. All right. Now we're left with the last and probably the better part of the animal. What I've seen happen in the past, folks, is a lot of people will pull the back straps or the loins out of there, and they'll pull the tenderloins out of there as well, and then grind the rest of the carcass into sausage and make cuts out of this as well. Now, again, there's no right or wrong way of doing this. You can leave this and roast it as a whole loin, or you can come in here. We're going to face this guy up a little bit. And I'll show you some kind of fun things here. Again, cutting about an inch thick. You got your chops there. Now, what a lot of folks, let me do this first. This connective tissue that's on here, that's going to be kind of tough. Remember, again, I allow those muscles to kind of slide over each other. A lot of folks will want to take that off. And what you do is you get your knife right underneath there. You can see I've got the tip of my knife in there. I've got it angled slightly up, and I'm just going to follow that on around. This is, you'll see a lot of chefs do this with beef tenderloins, called a peeled tender, just to get that connective tissue off there. Sometimes you can pull it and it'll come off on its own. And so you can see just kind of pulling that guy out of there, taking that connective tissue off, all right? Take a little bit more here. You see how my knife is fitting underneath there nicely. This works really well if you got a dull knife and it doesn't cut through the connective tissue. So you can follow that a little bit better. Again, you know, if it's something, it's a personal preference type thing. If you want to do that, you can. Others, probably not that big of a deal to them. Okay. Taking a lot of that off of there. Get this little piece off here. Okay. Now, you can see we've got just the steak, or the chop, if you will. Okay. or you can have a little bit more fun with it. A thing we do in the pork industry is we make butterflies. So we'll come in here, cut almost all the way through, and then cut through the other side. Butterfly it open. Gives you a little bit bigger portion size, just like so. Butterfly chop. Now, a fun thing to do is make if you want to do a stuffed one, okay? Okay, make your chop a little bit bigger, and then come in here, either which side doesn't matter, and create a little pocket inside there, just like so. Pocket inside there, and you can stuff that with whatever sausage, cheese, or whatnot. You can do that in there as well, okay? And so just a little stuffed chop right there. Now, here's kind of a fun thing to do. You can take this as a roast, all right? And again, having some culinary fun with this. Take this piece off of here. This is a fun thing. What we do, that little hair there, see, even we get hairs in there. What a lot of chefs will tell you, we eat with our eyes. And so you can have some fun with this, all right? And so what I'm going to do is roll this guy out, cutting about 1/4 of an inch all the way around, just like so. A little bit too deep there, it's all right. Kind of some fun things we can do. And then again, stuff that cheese, stuffing, dressing, however you want to say that, sausage if you will, and then roll that guy back up, tie it, and roast it. And then when you cut it to serve it, you have that kind of nice pinwheel thing going on there. So rather than just doing the loins or the butterflies, you can have a little bit of fun with the creating a little pocket in there. You can stuff it, or you can take a roast and roll it out like that, and put some sort of stuffing in there, roll it again, and tie it back up with some string. Butcher's twine is the best for that kind of stuff. And then now you've got a little bit of presentation there as well. And we're left with this piece that I've kind of buried here a little bit, is your tenderloin. This is the most tender cut on the carcass. And so you can leave it whole like that, or you can do what we did with the other ones and cut little bitty medallions like so. And again, you can have a little bit of fun with this. You can take that and makes really good kebab meat because it's very tender, and so you could have your own deer kebabs with the tenderloin. You can do that with these cuts as well, and it'll work well on the grill. And you can see we've generated some trim. And what a lot of folks like to do is make sausage out of the deer meat. And again, we didn't do a very good job of getting all the fat and connective tissue off of this. You could do that on your own, but deer meat's very lean. Again, going back to that nutritional thing that we talked about earlier, deer meat's very lean. But when we want sausage, we want a little bit of fat in there. And so what a lot of folks will do, and you can go to your local grocery store and purchase this, is get some pork. And you get like a pork shoulder, a Boston butt pork shoulder. It's a fattier cut of meat, and you could blend that 1-to-1. So 1 pound of deer meat to 1 pound of pork, or however you want to do that. Gives you a little bit of fat in there to play with your sausage. And you can make a fresh sausage, if you will. It's just generally just grounding things up and then putting a seasoning in there if you want. Or if you want to get a little bit more fancy, you can make like the summer sausages, which are very popular. Those take a little bit of skill and a little bit of knowledge ahead of time. And so you can buy those kits online or at your local sporting goods store to make your own sausage. And there's one ingredient in there we've got to be extremely careful with. It's called sodium nitrite. Sodium nitrite is a product, is a seasoning that we add to smoked meats like a summer sausage, because we're smoking these at such a low temperature that if there's a bacteria in there called Clostridium botulinum, which is the pathogen that causes botulism, if he's in there, that sodium nitrite's going to kill it, okay? And so that's why we added it. Now it also has some side benefits as well. Sodium nitrite creates that cured meat flavor that we like so much, as well as that cured meat color. So those are kind of byproducts there. But sodium nitrite used in excess can be dangerous, all right? This is not one of those situations where if a little bit does this, I bet a bunch does even better. No. Whatever the manufacturer's guidelines for whatever sausage your seasoning packet you're buying says, add just this amount for however much product you have. Please abide by that. This means that you're going to have to get a scale. And make sure the scale is accurate. Don't look at that and say, oh, that looks like 5 pounds of meat when it may actually be 3 pounds of meat or may actually be 10 pounds of meat, okay? So you're gonna be able to have to measure things out accurately. Now, what a lot of folks will like to do is a couple things with their summer sausage. Everything's better when you add cheese to it, right? All right? Don't go to your grocery store and buy over-the-shelf cheese, all right? When you're making a summer sausage that you're going to add cheese to, go online and order a high-temperature cheese. This cheese will not melt when you're cooking your sausage, and so when you cut into it, you can actually see, remember, we eat with our eyes, you can see those little bits of cheese in there. That's a good thing, because if you use store-bought cheese, which is not high-temperature cheese, what ends up happening is it melts and you don't get that visual effect of the cheese being in there. Plus what happens, it melts and then you put it in your refrigerator and it solidifies once again. That melting and re-solidified cheese tends to have a sour flavor. So you can use, what I would suggest you use is a high temperature cheese. And you can have fun with those because those high temperature cheeses come in just regular cheddar or Swiss or whatnot, but you can also get like a high temperature pepper jack. We utilize, for one of our products here on campus, we use a high temperature habanero jack cheese, so it's got a little bit of a spiciness as well. A lot of deer hunters I've come across like to add jalapeno to their summer sausage as well. Nothing better than jalapeno and cheese summer sausage. Do not go to the grocery store and get a jar of pickled jalapenos. The pH is very low and that very acidic. And if you add that to your sausage, it's not going to stick very well. We add the salt in there that helps the meat stick together, but pickled jalapenos are fresh jalapenos as well. They're very acidic and it won't let those meat proteins stick together. But if you get dried jalapenos and add it in there, your sausage will bind together a lot better as well, so you don't get the separation. So if you're doing that, make sure you're using the right cheese and the right pepper as well. And as always, folks, you know, if there's any problems, if you're wondering, is this spoiled or not, the best indication is this right here, the sniff test. If it doesn't smell good, chances are it's not good, all right? Again, these guys are, 70 to 75% water, and so they're going to get an off color to them. Sometimes you can see right here on this piece of tenderloin, that's because the water was absorbed when we cooled this down is what's happening there. You can carve that off. Wouldn't say it's spoiled by any stretch of the means, but use that sniff test. Color, whether it's beef, pork, lamb, chicken, even deer, we use color to kind of indicate whether or not something is spoiled. And this is a nice kind of brick red color, which indicates it's fresh. However, some bacteria, spoilage bacteria, get on there. They will produce peroxides, and those peroxides will bind with those color proteins and produce a green color. So if your meat starts to get green in color, that means it's getting spoiled as well. Okay? So always, just to recap everything that we've done, there's no right or wrong way to cut the deer up. We just took some beef cutting techniques and some pork cutting techniques and kind of showed some of those cuts that we have there as well. Understanding the tenderness of the animal, understanding that muscles of support versus muscles of locomotion are going to be the big players in dictating tenderness, as well as how we age it and how we cook it as well. And storage, like we talked about earlier, that vacuum bag, vacuum packaging, that's going to put that in the freezer. That's going to help with freezer burn, it's going to stay fresh for a longer period of time. So hopefully when you pull it out and you thaw it, again, thawing something on the kitchen counter is not a very good idea. Plan ahead, pull that vacuum packaged piece of deer out of your freezer, put it in your refrigerator, thaw it inside the refrigerator. You're gonna have to plan ahead because it's gonna thaw a lot slower than on the kitchen counter. But again, if there's any bacteria present, you're bacteria kind of go to sleep when they're frozen or in refrigeration, and so you're going to slow that growth down as well. And again, lymph nodes are common. Spoilage is common. We talked about how to detect that as well. And if you have any questions, please feel free to contact us either at the University of Kentucky or the folks at Kentucky Fish and Wildlife.